So today I want to do some review about introduction, thesis, um, logos, pathos, and ethos, and conclusions. Well, it will be a review. I'll be touching on a couple things that we haven't in the past as well, but it'll be primarily review today. So first, how to write your introduction and thesis. And by the way, this is all in your original handout packet, but I'll include it separately in this week's module as well. So first, a good thesis is specific. We've went through these examples before, so a good one would be arranged marriages in India prevent women from reaching their full potential in higher education. Thesis is not merely an announcement of a subject, so uh, a better one would be, in order to slow down the rape epidemic in South Africa, it is important to start a comprehensive education program focused on boys in elementary school. And a thesis is not a statement of fact. So rape is common throughout South Africa, is provable, so there's no claim or argument in it. So the purpose of your introduction is to introduce your topic, create interest, provide necessary but limited background information, preview the rest of your essay, and it should move from general to more specific to most specific in the thesis. Your introduction will identify the main idea and preview your essay. Remember that this is most often one or two sentences. I'm sorry, that's your thesis. And for the purpose of this class, I'm going to ask you to have it at the end of your first paragraph. Right? Make sure you introduce topic, create interest, and provide necessary but limited background information. And you can tell if it's limited or not if it's about a double-spaced page. If it's much more than that, then that's too much. If it's a lot less than half a double-spaced page, then that's too little. State why the main idea is important. State why the reader should care. As we've discussed previously, it needs to have sound proofs, right? So it needs to establish logos, logic, or sound reasoning. And what we're going to look for logic here is, does it make sense? Does it go from broad to narrow, right? And does it avoid any logical jumps or fallacies? We'll talk about them next week. So then we have pathos, the balanced emotional appeal, and ethos, authorial credibility. Remember, in your essay, when you say, I think, I believe, in my opinion, those weaken your ethos. That means that you're not strongly asserting your position, right? Instead of saying, I think it is important to stop pollution in China, you say it is important to stop pollution in China because, and then explain why. And then ethos, authorial credibility, which here you should be developing a working knowledge of your sources, but primarily you establish your credibility by knowing the terminology, showing your reader that you know the terminology, and then leaning on experts through citations, quotes, paraphrases, etc. Okay, and keep in mind again, that should be about a half a double-spaced page. We went over this in class last week, but your thesis for an argument paper must be debatable. If there's not two sides to it, at least there could be many more than that. But if there's not two, then it's not a debatable thesis, and it needs to be a reasonable a debate with a reasonable person. So just saying sex trafficking needs to stop or rape is bad, no reasonable person can disagree with that. Instead, think of how you could disagree in a way that a reasonable person could disagree with. So a claim of some kind. So non-debatable thesis statement, as we went over in class, is pollution is bad for the environment. No reasonable person can disagree with that. Then the example of a better thesis statement, at least 25% of the federal budget should be spent on limiting pollution. People can disagree with that in all kinds of ways, right? From the percentage to whether the federal government should be doing it at all, right? Another example, America's anti-pollution efforts should focus on privately owned cars, right? So a reasonable person could easily disagree with that and say, nope, it should be focused on other things. Okay, so we've talked about logos, ethos, and pathos, and I want to go a little more in depth with them than we did in the first half of the semester. So rhetoric in general, it means to make visible the means of persuasion. So to make it clear and obvious and appealing and present, that's what rhetoric means for at its basic level. Rhetorical appeals are persuasive strategies used in arguments, but in other types of writing as well, to support claims and respond to opposing arguments. The strongest argument relies on all three appeals. And so we see common appeals to logos here, scientific facts or theories, history, data, quotations, citations, real life examples, personal anecdotes, depending on the style of writing. Those wouldn't be appropriate in a college level research paper, but it could be appropriate in a reflection paper. Definitions, informed opinions, and indicated reasoning. Ethos, again, is that your credibility, that the reader can believe what you're saying. It can be the author's profession or background, their publications, them appearing sincere and knowledgeable, which is something that you should be trying to accomplish. Conceding to opposition when appropriate. So making a small concession could bring goodwill and make more likely that other person's going to move to your side of the argument. That you're morally and ethically believable, that you're not just waving with the wind in whatever direction. Appropriate language for audience and subject. For your writing here, it's an academic audience. It's for me or other students who are interested in your topic. Appropriate language, vocabulary, correct grammar, professional format. All those things build a stronger ethos. As far as pathos, emotionally loaded language or pictures, vivid descriptions, emotional examples, anecdotes, testimony, or narratives, figurative language, and emotional tone. Now remember here, in a more academic sense, we want a limited pathos, right? We're not referring to our own anecdotes. We're not referring to our own narrative. For this case, it's connect with the reader in some way emotionally, even if it's going to depend on your subject of how much you can do there, right? So let's look a little deeper into logos here. Just a couple of brief things. I'm going to try to keep things short as usual today. So with logos, right, we have facts and statistics, but a stronger research paper will use different kinds of evidence. They won't rely on only quotes. They won't rely on only data. They won't rely on only well-known facts. A good research paper uses variety of different kinds of evidence to make a stronger claim. You need to avoid untrustworthy sources, so when they can't be backed up by more trustworthy sources. So, for instance, in a science or medical context, a survey with a sample size of 2,000 would be more reliable than a sample size of 4. And if you were to refer to that sample size of 4 in your paper, it may weaken your reliability, right? Which could hurt your ethos as well. And a logical argument must be reasonable, not make logical jumps, which we're going to talk about more next class, and avoid extreme positions. For example, a paper could discuss cat and dog allergies by describing symptoms of the allergies and say 30% of people have those allergies. I'm actually sympathetic to them because I'm one of those people. But if the author then concludes cats and dogs should be banned in the US, well, that claim is so extreme it undermines the argument, right? It ignores the positive aspects of having those pets. For ethos, this is the one I think we've been leaning on the most because as a person who doesn't have a terminal degree in the field like yourselves, you need to have a clear ethos so your reader can trust you. The best way to achieve that is, does the person have a terminal degree in their field? Have they been working in that field for a long time? Is their work in peer-reviewed academic journals, right? But this can depend on what kind of assignment you're writing. If you're in a high school context and rather than a college level research class, you might be able to have a little bit of a less trustworthy source. Or if you're writing for a local newspaper rather than an academic journal, or a writing for a blog rather than a professor, right? You take your audience into account when you use all these modes. In general, when faced with new information, ask ethos-related questions. Who's providing this information? Are they reliable? How do you know? Also keep in mind that strong ethos does not automatically mean someone's valid. We all know people who pretend to be confident and absolutely know what they're talking about and say utter bull malarkey, right? Um, there are also disagreements within fields. So, you could be just looking at the other side of a disagreement. Pathos, of course, applies to emotion. It's used in advertisements and is particularly effective on our population. As Western individualistic culture, especially the most individualistic, we value emotions or pathos because it signals our individualism, right? And so, because of this, we are very prone to fall for advertisement, which probably is one of the reasons why we're the most consumeristic society, right? But for our cases, for a college level research paper, you want to avoid extreme pathos. Find a way to connect to your reader emotionally without overdoing it. Now, that's going to be a little bit of a tough balance with those of you that are dealing with tough topics like sexual trafficking or child prostitution, right? You have to walk that line very carefully because you can make it clear that you object to the practice without sounding extreme, right? And so that would be a focus. So I want to go over, we looked at this example before, but here was the final version. What we looked at before earlier in the semester was a draft version. This is what the student turned in for the final version of their paper. And so I want you to say, first look for logos. Does it make logical sense? Avoid logical leaps? Does it start broad and work its way to be narrow? Does it connect emotionally? And do they clearly establish credibility or ethos? So over the last 250 years, Western colonialism and imperialism has impacted Uganda. Before Western intervention, Ugandan leaders were open to different gender and sexual identities. As Uganda was colonized by the British, they began adopting beliefs that matched those of their colonizer, including beliefs on gender and sexuality. With a population that was already susceptible to these messages because of imperialism, in 2009, American evangelical Scott Lively headed a Christian conference in Uganda. His section of the conference was about the evils of the gay agenda. Other American evangelicals supported Lively, as well as the Ugandan government's endorsement of their infamous anti-sodomy laws. 1 month after the conference, which was presented to many people, including government officials, a new bill was introduced in Uganda. The anti-homosexuality bill would make homosexual acts committed in Uganda crimes punishable by life in prison and in some cases death. The hate speech from radical American groups is spreading all over the world and is resulting in radical events that contradict the predominant Christian value of love thy neighbor. Okay, couple things here. So it starts wide, which if you remember back, it failed to do before. The introduction before started right here in 2009. That would be starting narrow. Instead, it looks a little more broad. Over the last 250 years, uh, colonialism and imperialism impacted gender and sexuality beliefs in Uganda. That's broad. Then it ties together with the more narrow message here, right? And then it ends with the anti-homosexuality bill and a claim about it. So the um, much more narrow towards thesis. Now, I would say this thesis could be improved a bit for a number of reasons. First of all, it then pull like that last sentence, the hate speech from these groups, it pulls out a little more broad again, right? Um, and so I would say it could use, I would workshop this with them and say, how could we make a stronger claim that is easier to debate with a reasonable person, right? In a slightly more narrow way. It's close. It's okay, right? But we could strengthen it. It's clear that she has ethos. She refers to citations and experts throughout. She refers to the terminology that is used there, right? And her uses of colonialism, imperialism, and specific people and places and laws shows she's got credibility. And then finally, pathos or emotion. I think just the topic itself lends itself to that, right? You could say she could be a little bit more or a little less with pathos or emotion, but I think the topic just almost automatically appeals to somebody in the same way. A strong reaction, probably in both ways, right? So this does a good job. I would say the thesis could be improved a little bit, a stronger claim that a more reasonable person could disagree with. But I do like that she refers to why Christians, because she wasn't, should believe to her. That's a good rhetorical strategy, or to move towards her direction, I meant. Um, Okay, so the last thing I want to go over is simple. We went over this last time, but just kind of review quick is how to write a conclusion. Conclusions should wrap up the ideas in your paper. After moving from general to specific in the introduction and body paragraphs, the conclusion should begin pulling back to more general information. So restate your topic, your main ideas, and why they're important. Restate the thesis idea, not the exact wording, but the thesis idea. Address opposing viewpoints briefly, and explain why readers should align to your position. Occasionally, there's a call for action if applicable. Often I see students who either um, keep in mind as you're doing this, a half a double space page is a good guideline. I see students who are like, okay, keep it simple, 3 sentences. And that's too simple. You have to make sure you hit on each of your main points. And then I see other who want to restate everything in their paper and it's 3/4 of a page. That's too much, right? So keep that half a page double space guideline in mind, and it kind of gets you to that space where you need to be. Once you've accomplished these tasks, you are finished. Do not try to solve world hunger. Simplicity is best. Most important rule, do not add any information. The body of the paper is to prove things. The conclusion is not where you add new stuff. Okay. Hopefully that's good. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks.